Research at Mintel. Thank you for coming in today. Joe described it as a whopper of a deal, but is it a good deal?
I think it's a very bad deal because Asda and Sainsbury's are at opposite poles in the mass market. You've got Asda, our research shows this, attracting a younger, less affluent clientele. Sainsbury's attracting older and more affluent people. The overlap is smaller than between any other of the big four. It really makes no sense. And the trouble is, even if you retain both brands, as soon as you try to bring them together and get some sort of cost savings, you will end up undermining both sides.
So why do you think they're looking at getting this deal done then?
Well, first of all, Walmart, who owns Asda, Walmart must want to sell, or at least massively reduce its investment in the business. It must be disillusioned with Asda, therefore. And I think the recent Asda performance, and OK, the sales performance in the last 2 or 3 quarters has been good, but before that, for 2 or 3 years, it was doing really, really badly. And so I think it probably is just disillusioned with UK food retailing. And we know that superstores in the UK are losing market share. So why put two declining businesses, because that's effectively what they are, why put them together? It doesn't make any sense to me.
So the likes of Lidl and Aldi, who we've seen really gain a growing share of the market, what do you think they'll be thinking watching all this?
I don't think they'll be too worried. I think all the competitors would be rubbing their hands with glee, because I think commercially it makes no sense at all. It's not going to affect Aldi and Lidl, because it's not going to... Asda and Sainsbury's are still going to operate from very much the same sort of cost base that they had before. They're not really going to be able to make many savings. Aldi and Lidl are still going to have that lower cost base, that very focused buying on far fewer products, and they're still going to be able to be cheaper. So I don't think it makes any difference to them.
So Joe there mentioned that competition is going to be looked at very closely. Absolutely. And also Tesco is going to be seeing what will be done on this. just take us through this.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, theoretically, it's a huge merger in the sector, but Asda plus Sainsbury's is still only much the same sort of size as Tesco. Tesco was allowed to merge with Booker, and Booker had some significant food retailing interests, and the Competition Commission didn't have any problem with that. So I would have thought that the competition would let this, this merger through. It might ask for some store disposals, but I think it depends very much on what sort of assurances the merged group will give on retaining their two separate identities. OK, so the major challenges then, how are they still going to retain that appeal to their core market, their core customers? That's the real problem. And that's what they've really got to maintain, because Asda and Sainsbury's do stand for different things in the market. And as soon as you start trying to bring them together, you might very well undermine that, and that's where the problems would happen. I mean, we saw this once before with the Morrisons Safeway merger. Now, to be fair, in that case, they tried to combine with one brand, which turned out to be a complete disaster. So I'm not saying it would be as bad as that, but I think there's still that risk. They need to be separate, and if they are going to be separate, then it makes no commercial sense in bringing them together. Just very finally, you've probably answered this, but just to reiterate, would they risk changing their product if this merger did come together? I think there's some scope for them probably benefiting on both sides. So it's contradicting what I've said. The Argos customer, for instance, Sainsbury's owns Argos. I think the Argos customer probably does fit quite well with the Asda customer base. So there may be some scope there. There may be some scope for Asda learning from Sainsbury's premium brands. But I think this scope, really, the potential is not that great. So an announcement on Monday? Who knows? Oh, we'll all be watching. Richard Perks, thank you so much. Busy Saturday for you. Indeed. Thank you. Other news here on BBC News now. And Alfie Evans, the toddler at the centre of a long legal battle, has died nearly a week after his life support was withdrawn. Alfie, who would have been 2 next month, had a degenerative neurological condition. He'd been in a semi-vegetative state for more than a year. On Facebook, Alfie's parents said that they're absolutely heartbroken. Our correspondent, Judith Moritz, reports.
For the first weeks of Alfie Evans' life, he seemed healthy, happy and well. But he soon started to develop problems and he was admitted to hospital, where scans showed that his brain was being destroyed. The little boy spent a year in intensive care before doctors said they felt his life support should be stopped. Alfie's parents, Kate and Tom, strongly disagreed with the medical view that their son could not be helped.
On the outside, he's shown the biggest fight, and that's what's given us the biggest thrive to get him through this. And it's heartbreaking knowing that the doctors, just because they can't find a diagnosis, think it's okay to come into me and mum and say, well, we can't find an answer, so I think it's time that we give up on Alfie. No, if you're going to give up on him, please reassure us and refer him.
The couple began a long legal battle. They took their case through all the available courts, several times in the UK and twice to Europe. They've had huge support initially from a group of mums and children, but increasingly from a growing social media campaign. Intimidated. Alfie's plight has made international headlines, especially in Italy. Alfie's parents wanted to airlift him to a hospital in Rome with connections to the Vatican. Tom Evans was granted an audience with the Pope, who backed his case, and Alfie was granted Italian citizenship. There was also support from Poland, a tweet from the president and a hospital visit from these Polish women.
I saw the post yesterday from Alfie's father, like, thank you so much, thank you for all different international, community, be with me.
Outside the hospital, campaigners kept vigil. Whilst inside, after his ventilation was switched off, Alfie hung on for 4 days. But this morning, in a Facebook post, Alfie's father, Tom, said his son had laid down his shield and gained his wings. Outside Alder Hey this morning, supporters came to leave flowers. Alfie's parents say they're heartbroken. They battled for months. Now their fight has given way to grief. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Liverpool.
Well, in the past few hours, Pope Francis, who met Tom Evans at the Vatican earlier this month in support of the family's campaign, has given his reaction on Twitter. He said, "I am deeply moved by the death of little Alfie. Today I pray especially for his parents as God the Father receives him in his tender embrace." Labour has intensified its calls for the Home Secretary to resign. Amber Rudd apologised last night for being unaware that the Home Office had targets for removing illegal immigrants from the UK. Well, this morning, Cabinet Ministers offered her their support. Our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake, has the report.
Day after day of questions for the Home Secretary. Was her department to blame for the mistreatment of legal migrants? Were there targets for removing those here illegally? And inevitably, would she quit? But it was a question about the broader approach to immigration and her answer that led to even more pressure on Amber Rudd.
Targets for removals, when were they set? We don't have targets for removals.
An apology in Parliament. The targets did exist, but she hadn't been aware. It was announced they'd be scrapped. And then, The Guardian reported a memo was sent to the Home Secretary last June specifying a target for the number of deportations in the coming year. Silence at first from the Home Office, then a series of tweets from Amber Rudd. She didn't see the memo, but it had been sent to her office. Again, she wasn't aware of targets, she should have been, and she was sorry. She promised a statement in Parliament on Monday.
The Home Secretary's apologised, saying that, of course, she should have seen it, but she can't be held accountable or responsible for a document that she didn't see and for decisions that she didn't take.
Cabinet colleagues have backed Amber Rudd, and the Prime Minister has said she has full confidence in the Home Secretary, but there's no let-up in the pressure for her to go.
I think she's in a very difficult position. I think she's hanging by a thread. On the one hand, there may be more to come out, but what we do know is that no one will take this government seriously on the Windrush scandal until Amber Rudd offers her resignation.
Amber Rudd has faced serious accusations, which in different political times might have prompted a resignation. But for her to go would leave Theresa May further exposed to criticism of her record as Home Secretary. And with challenges in Parliament ahead for the government's Brexit policy, it could upset the delicate balance of opinion in Cabinet. Jonathan Blake, BBC News, Westminster.
In the United States, a former police officer has appeared in court, charged with 13 murders and 51 rapes. Prosecutors allege Joseph James DeAngelo was the so-called Golden Gate State killer, whose crimes terrorised California in the 1970s and 80s. James Cook reports.
This frail old man is accused of terrorizing California in the 1970s and 80s.
Is Joseph James D'Angelo your true and correct legal name? I'm sorry? Yeah. Yes.
Handcuffed to a wheelchair, Joseph James D'Angelo appeared confused at times as a judge explained he was initially facing 2 counts of murder. The accused made no plea and was refused bail. In total, he's suspected of at least 13 killings, 51 rapes and scores of burglaries, many dating to the time when he was a police officer. His lawyer says he's entitled to a fair trial.
We have the law that suggests that he is innocent until they prove him guilty, and that's what I was going to ask everybody to remember, because I feel like he's been tried in the press here already.
Mr. D'Angelo, a father of grown-up children, was said to be extremely surprised when he was arrested at home in a quiet suburb of Sacramento last week. The crime spree had begun more than 40 years ago, just half an hour's drive away, before spreading to the San Francisco area and then on to Central and Southern California. Detectives have revealed they used a genealogy website to narrow down their search for the suspect, who was arrested after officers obtained DNA from an item he'd discarded. Relatives of some of Joseph James D'Angelo's alleged victims were in court for the hearing. If convicted, he could be sentenced to death. James Cook, BBC News, Los Angeles.
It's just coming up to 3:15. Your headlines here on BBC News. 2 of Britain's biggest supermarkets, Sainsbury's and Asda, confirmed they're in advanced merger talks in a deal that could be worth £10 billion. Alfie Evans, the toddler at the centre of a long legal battle, has died nearly a week after his life support was withdrawn. Cabinet colleagues rally round Home Secretary Amber Rudd. She says she didn't see a memo copied to her office which detailed Home Office targets for deporting illegal immigrants.
And in sport, Liverpool were held to a goalless draw by Stoke City, who remain in the relegation zone 3 points adrift of safety with just 2 games of the season remaining. In the Scottish Premiership, Hamilton Academical beat bottom of the table Ross County 2-0 as they aim to stay in the top flight. And Sebastian Vettel will be on pole for Ferrari for tomorrow's Azerbaijan Grand Prix with Mercedes' Lewis Hamilton. He will start in 2nd place. I'll be back with details on those stories and a lot more for you at around 5:30.
Now, President Trump has said he'll continue to apply pressure to North Korea to try and rid the peninsula of nuclear weapons. Following the summit between North and South Korea, Mr. Trump said he would forge a deal with the North if it were possible when he holds talks with Kim Jong-un in the coming weeks. Media outlets in North Korea have called yesterday's meeting historic. Our correspondent, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, who's in Seoul, said the event has also been welcomed by the South Korean media.
Well, given those extraordinary scenes at the summit yesterday, it's perhaps not surprising that there are some rather excitable headlines in the newspapers here in Seoul this morning. Here's the Korea Herald. Korea's to declare end to Korean War. And most of the front pages of the Korean papers here in South Korea are very much of the same theme. This is the Dong-A Ilbo with a big picture of Kim Jong-un here and President Moon Jae-in embracing. More of the same on most of the papers you can see here. It's interesting also to note that we now know that people in North Korea are getting to see these pictures for the first time because the Nodong Shimbun, which is the biggest official daily paper in Pyongyang, showing pretty much every scene from yesterday's summit and also publishing in full the Panmunjom declaration that the 2 leaders signed at the end of the summit yesterday, in which it includes the words commitment to seek complete denuclearization of the peninsula. That is in there, although without any comment. Now, as far as interpretation of this is all going, here in the south, I think one would describe it as optimism, but cautious optimism, and in some of the papers, scepticism as well. For example, in the Jungan Ilbo, which is a very popular paper here, there's commentary saying it was never made public what Kim's idea of denuclearization is, and how and when denuclearization will be accomplished. And I think that sort of sums up a lot of the mood here, a real sense that an opportunity is open for dialogue to go forward and for peace to be achieved, but scepticism about what the North Korean leader's intentions are, in particular regarding his nuclear weapons.
Now, Donald Trump has just tweeted about the summit. He wrote, just had a long and very good talk with President Moon of South Korea. Things are going very well. Time and location of meeting with North Korea is being set. Also spoke to Prime Minister Abe of Japan to inform him of the ongoing negotiations. Now, parole board decisions in England and Wales could be challenged more easily under new proposals. A review was set up after the parole board approved the release of the serial sex offender John Worboys, a decision that was later overturned. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Danny Shaw.
Still behind bars, John Worboys, the man known as the Black Cab Rapist. His victims had to go to court to appeal against the parole board decision to let him out of jail. They didn't even know why the 60-year-old prisoner had been approved for release until the legal action began. The case exposed flaws in the parole system, and ministers are now trying to address them. They're planning a series of reforms to the parole board to make it more transparent. A summary of the reasons for parole decisions will be sent to victims and in some cases to other people who request it. A scheme to keep victims informed about their cases and offenders' licence conditions will be extended, and a parole board judge will review decisions that are contested and could even hold hearings in public. Nick Hardwick lost his job at the parole board because of the Worboys case. He told the BBC extra resources would be needed for the government's reforms to work. But ministers want to go further. They're reviewing the composition of parole panels and the evidence that's needed to make decisions about the release of prisoners like John Worboys. Danny Shaw, BBC News.